Good morning. I'm Linda Gill. I'm the branch manager of the Southwest Louisiana Genealogical and Historical Library. For Tidbits of History today, I'm going to talk about the history of Lake Charles. Primarily the early history up to about a little after 1910. I couldn't decide whether to do this in a chronological or a topical order, and so it's turning out in a little bit of both. I'm trying not to be redundant, but sometimes I will probably even be that. So let's begin. The earliest residents of what we call Lake Charles now were the Indians, the Native Americans, and they were called Attakapaw, but they called themselves the Ishak. The name Attakapaw means flesh eater, and it's possible that rival Native Americans called them that to the Europeans in order to be in favor with the Europeans and have them not be. There were a lot of rivals in those days, even among the Native Americans. In those days, before the Europeans came, it probably looked a lot like this, other than that little house through the woods. There would have been instead of invasive plants like water hyacinths and tallow trees, there probably would have been cypress trees and cypress knees, which I see a cypress tree there. And there would have been oaks, beeches, magnolias, pecans, and pine, of course. And the animals, I've read that there were actually elk in this area at one time. I don't think they were here by the time the Europeans came, but apparently that was in far history. This little house in the woods might actually be the Sallier homestead, and that year was 1925. I neglected to say where I got this information and the photographs from. The photographs are primarily from the Maud Reed scrapbooks, which are housed in the McNeese Archives. And the McNeese Archives has put a lot of the photos online. They're on the Louisiana Digital Library, and I can show you later how you can access them. The information comes from old newspapers, from Maud Reed scrapbooks, because she did interview and know a lot about the history of the area. She was the granddaughter of the first judge of Calcasieu. She received photographs from friends, too, for that reason. So the first European residents, you know, of course, probably that Bartholomew LeBleu and his wife came to Calcasieu, what became Calcasieu Parish, and they settled near where LeBleu Settlement is now, on English Bayou or near English Bayou? Near English Bayou.
Next to Boys Village, Boys and Girls Village.
Okay.
West.
And their daughter, Catherine, married Charles Sallier. Charles Sallier had been married already, and his first wife died, and Catherine was about 16 years old when she married Charles Sallier. The land is not actually Sallier land. It was the LeBleu land. Mr. LeBleu had a Spanish land grant, and in the American state papers, the man who owned it at the time that they were doing land claims said that Catherine had purchased it from Chief Lacassine. Now, there's conflicting statements, but it's interesting, you know, that there is a little bit of history back 200 years or more than 200 years to indicate where the land came from. And that land ranged from Contraband Bayou, south of the Contraband Bayou, to about where Lake Street is now. And as far back, it's hard to say because it really went far back. During the winter, and I'm having a problem. During the winter, the Salyers lived inland. Where the Salyer Oak is located was their summer home, their winter home. I have that wrong. And that was because the winds off of the lake were cold, and they went inland to get away from it, to be sheltered by the trees and such. So even though that says summer home, it's winter home. And that was located where the Salyer Oak is, and this is some of their descendants that still live there. There's conflicting statements I've found that say how old the Salyer Oak is. It ranges from 280 years old, according to the Imperial Calcasieu Museum, to 375 years old, which would make it a small sapling in 1639. And that's according to the U.S. Gulf Coast States Geotourism website. Can you imagine having that in your yard? That would take up our yard. When the United States bought Louisiana from France in 1803, there was no defined territory. And as you can see, according to the black over on the left, what we live in was actually part of the neutral zone. The people that were living here had to leave. The United States and Spain agreed to make it a neutral zone, and the Ryans, you can find them in church records living on the lower Vermilion until about 1817. The Salyers were in Texas. They went west and the Ryans went back east. Until the Adams-Onis Treaty was signed in 1819, the land between the Sabine River and the Calcasieu and north to Natchitoches and even further north than Natchitoches was neutral ground, and no one was allowed to settle there. Now, there were people in the northern part up near Natchitoches that would go in and squat on settlers' farms, people who had left legitimately. Their farms were being housed by outlaws. And the Spanish and the Americans went in twice to make them move out. I think the second time they completely burned out the barns and the houses and everything. Okay, along the lakefront, to me, the most historic sites in Lake Charles would be the Salyer home place, which the Barb home is built around, the Jacob Ryan home place, which is the bank on the corner of Broad and Lakeshore Drive. The, is it Capital One? I get the two confused, but it's the Capital One Bank is no, not the tower. The Capital One building is built on the home place. They have a historic designation in the lobby. But Mr. Ryan was the one who laid out Lake Charles, and I'll go back into that later. And then the third place on the lake that I think is most historic is the curve where the Bilbo Cemetery is. In 1839, the United States placed a cantonment, which was like a fort there, and it was because of illegal smuggling going up the river. And it was only there a couple of years, and then they returned to Fort Jessup up near Natchitoches. And the Bilbo family then moved there. And this is their homestead, which was allegedly the commissary for the fort. They lived in that. Nothing was wasted. And this is what the Bilbo Cemetery looked like about 60 or 70 years ago. Jacob Ryan is buried there because he was married to their daughter. Their children also married into the Hodges family, several families. When Calcasieu was formed in 1840, it was cut off from Imperial St. Landry Parish. And Calcasieu Parish really didn't have a whole lot of inhabitants. It reached from Oakdale to the Gulf, to Cameron, and from the Sabine River to Jennings, actually, I guess the Mermentau. And there were not enough people on Lake Charles to even be considered a community or a village. When the police jury met for the first time, each one of them chose where they thought the county seat should be, the Calcasieu seat should be. Lisbon, which was on the west side of the lake near Baghdad. Center, which I've never heard of and never seen any place except in the police jury minutes. And Marion was also considered. And the vote came out with 2 votes for Marion. So Marion was on the Calcasieu River near or on Old Town Road. Allegedly, no one knows where Marion was, but I can't help but think that St. Landry Parish has some records that could tell us where it was. The first courthouse was at Marion, and after 12 years, between 1840 and 1852, the population grew on the lake. It had become a little village. And the people down here, I think, didn't like traveling up to Marion. It wasn't an easy place to travel to. So they got permission to move the courthouse to Lake Charles. Samuel Kirby and Mr. Ryan did. And the first courthouse was a crude one, so they built a new one about a year later. They built a third courthouse in 1872, and this picture was the first masonry courthouse and was built in 1890. The other courthouses faced North Court Street, and this one faced Ryan, as it does now. But it's not the same courthouse. Okay, Broadway on Lake Charles was considered South Court Street, and there were homes, a few inns, I guess you would call them, small rooming establishments, and I'll explain where that went when we get to the fire. Captain Bryan was the first mayor of Lake Charles. He was the editor of the Echo, and he was a Civil War hero. And this is his store, this is his form of living, which was on the corner of Ryan and North Court Street. There's a vacant lot now with a pretty brick building behind it. That's interesting to see the difference of what was Ryan and North Court in 1888. And that building burned during the 1910 fire. This is looking east from Ryan Street on Pujo, and you see it looked country, didn't it? It doesn't look like a town at all. Their method of travel was by stagecoach, horseback, river. No airplanes, no cars, no paved streets. It must have been really interesting. They didn't know what they were missing, did they? And I complain about bumpy roads. Okay. Another method of travel, of course, was the lake. And it's kind of hard to see, but that is a schooner there. In fact, there's 2 boats. But not only were those the mode of travel, but they were made here. Because of the logging. There were so many trees that they could make ships here. And they use wood for everything, of course. You know, their homes, their firewood and everything. But eventually they began sending the logs out. It became an export. And the newest mode of travel came in 1879 when the Louisiana Western Railroad, which later became Southern Pacific, came to Lake Charles and built their depot on Railroad Avenue. The early education, Samuel Kirby came to Lake Charles in the 1840s. No, he came earlier because he helped bring the courthouse here. So he came in the 1830s from Vermont. And he was a lawyer, a trained lawyer, and he was a teacher. So he was the first teacher in Lake Charles itself. And when he gave it up, Delia Bryan, who came in as a single young woman, Delia Singletary, she took over his school. And after she married Captain Bryan, for a while she didn't teach, and then, as you can see, in 1888 she was teaching again. These women were not governed because they had private schools. The public school teachers, if they got married, they could not teach. So this is why we had a lot of private schools in Lake Charles, because people would come in and the local people would pay them to teach the children. Knapp Drugstore, the building is still there. Do any of you know what this is? Pujo Street Cafe on the corner of Ryan and Pujo. The architecture has changed quite a bit, but according to what I've read, it's the same building within. Leopold Kaufman came to Lake Charles in 1872, and this is his first store that was from 1882. Mr. Kaufman was responsible for bringing a lot of his friends into Lake Charles too, and all were prominent citizens active in the community in all ways. Julia Muller was one of them, and she had a home on the corner of Division and Ryan, across the street from where the current Muller's building is. If you're old enough to remember the Woolworths store, that's where it was. And her business grew. The first bank in Lake Charles was built in 1884 by Jabez Watkins. This was on the corner of Broad Street and Hodges, where Sewella now has classes in the old Gale building. Before that, people borrowed money from Jacob Ryan or whoever had it to loan them. With the logging, Jacob Ryan was the first one to have a lumber mill, but he didn't plane it. It was just cutting down trees and I guess scraping off all the limbs. But eventually they had planing mills, they had fence companies, they had every kind of use of wood that there was. And this was on Ryan Street near the Clarence Street on the east side, about where the transit authority is now. The Catholic Church brought in some nuns to teach the children, and they provided education for not only the Catholic children, but the children of the non-Catholic families, the Jewish people, the Presbyterians, Episcopal, all of them were together. And this was on Ryan Street also. Central School on the Kirkman, Kirby, Pujo block, they had their first graduating class of high school students in 1896. Oops. Central School, until the current building was built, faced Kirkman Street. And after Lake Charles High was opened on Enterprise Boulevard, it became an elementary school only. This was also a city school. This was not a parish school. Mr. Kaufman's business grew, and this is the Kaufman store, if I'm not mistaken, circa 1890. And that was on the corner of Ryan and Broad, where there's now a vacant parking lot, but the Walgreens store was there back in until the 60s or 70s. This was from the top of the courthouse in about 1895. You can see that the town had grown quite a bit. I tried to make these pictures larger, but can y'all see that very well to where you can see how far back the houses go? I don't have a pointer, but the building, okay, this is the Catholic Church in the foreground, and to the right is the school, the convent school. And to the left is a livery stable facing Bilbo Street. And if you see the two-story building, I don't really know if that's a home or if that was a hotel. Like I said, there's so many mysteries that I would love to know more about. Take a time machine back in time. This is the lake in 1895. It looks to me like over there on the far side before the forest that there's ground showing up through. There was no beach as we know having a beach now. The building with the little cupola on top is the marketplace at the foot of Pujo Street, and that is where the Hazel docked, the ferry Hazel docked to take people across the lake to Westlake. This is 1895 with the wharves. There was no port as such. There were just docks and wharves where the boats would come in. And a lot of stuff was going out from Lake Charles. Lake Charles was a big agricultural center. They were an agricultural center. Logging went out. Boats were made here and sold to people in other places. Rice became a commodity that the price of rice was actually set in the Lake Charles, at the Lake Charles port. The worldwide price of rice was set at the port of Lake Charles. Okay, now Muller's has grown to 1900. This is still on the southeast corner of Ryan and Division. And as in the other frame house, Mrs. Muller and her family lived there, and you can see upstairs that they were living there as well.
So that was on the southeast, you say? That was
Right.
on the northeast?
Right, where Woolworths used to be. Mm-hmm. This actually isn't in what I was trying to do for the town of Lake Charles. Downtown Lake Charles, to me, is from Piton Bayou to Lawrence Street until the trains came, and then Railroad Avenue became a part of the community. But the Baptist orphanage was here. They had moved here from Kiachi, which is up in the Calcasieu National Forest, and they later moved to Monroe, where they still are. And Mrs. Landry bought this building and renovated it and donated it to the Catholic Church to be used as a boys' school. That was St. Landry School, which is St.
Louis.
St. Louis now. Thank you.
Landry Memorial then,
Landry Memorial, yes.
in memory of her husband.
That's right. It was in memory of her husband that she did this. Okay, Lake Charles was a thriving little community at the turn of the 20th century. You can see that they had electric lines, probably those are also telegraph lines. The trolleys, they had water, power, electric. They had ice for refrigeration. And this is the corner of Kirby and Ryan where the Phoenix building is now. And this two-story building just behind the trees on the left, that is the Williams Opera House, where the fire of 1910, behind which the fire of 1910 began. Another school in 1905, the St. Charles Academy, had become a brick building. They obviously had a lot of students to fill in that much space, didn't they? And this was on the corner of Ryan and Kirby. No.
Ryan and Seventh.
No, this is before, no, this is before that.
That was Kirby and Belleville, maybe.
It's across from the church. When you think of
It's across from City Hall. I guess it was where the Phoenix building was. That doesn't sound right, though. We'll see when we come to the pictures of the fire. The ferry Hazel took people across the lake to the west side, and that was from 1888 until 1916. Trolleys on Ryan Street on the corner of Ryan and Kirby.
What is the story of the Hazel?
What?
What is the story of the Hazel?
The Hazel was named after Captain Wirt's daughter. And there had been ferries that crossed the lake before the Hazel, but she was there the longest and seemed to be the most popular or people reminiscing, you know.
And they named March Street after him, and that's like,
Mm-hmm.
Let me add to that. She was moved from here over to the Mississippi River and ran regularly between Baton Rouge and Port
Oh,
Allen.
after she was decommissioned here?
Decommissioned here, she was not decommissioned here, she was renovated.
So did y'all hear him? She was moved from here over to the Mississippi River.
Right.
Okay.
Between Port Allen and Baton Rouge.
Between Port Allen and Baton Rouge as a ferry also.
I've
Okay.
ridden over
Well, I knew there was a ferry there, but I didn't know it was the
there.
Hazel.
Hazel.
Okay, and this is the Pujo Street landing. And as I said a while ago, see how that little, I call it a cupola up there. This was a city market where you could go, just like now you can go to the farmer's market. This particular event was a Mardi Gras. And this beautiful place to me was destroyed during the hurricane of 1918. Lake Charles had a lot of disasters that caused us to lose a lot of history. The Borealis Rex was the mail boat between Lake Charles and Cameron from 1905 to 1930. There again, there were other boats, but it was the Borealis Rex and the Hazel that were most remembered by people. Do you know what happened to it?
The Rex was sunk right there on the lake.
Didn't it sink during the hurricane?
Yeah, it did.
Okay.
Its ruins stayed out there for the longest. They were visible.
Okay. This was the courthouse they remodeled it, made it look totally different from the previous photo that I showed you. And it was there from 1902 until 1910. It centered between North Court Street and South Court Street, or South Court Street, also known as Broadway. And if you were standing in the middle of Kirby Street 3 blocks down, you saw that courthouse. This was the first city hall, and it was very new when the fire of 1910 happened. There had been no city hall before. They met in the upper floors of the fire stations. And the fire stations were just wooden buildings. They were nothing elaborate at all. But to the left of the city hall, which was facing Kirby Street, that is the first brick fire station. And the house on the right was the house of a judge who ordered the courthouse to have a fire-safe vault and for the materials to keep from being burned. Unfortunately, that wasn't followed. So we have no records before 1910. The first firemen in Lake Charles were actually whoever showed up. And in 1879, they had their first organized group of volunteer firemen. These men bought their own uniforms, or rather they probably had someone make them. They had fundraisers to buy equipment. In 1905, the first brick fire department, so it was there for 5 years. I didn't remember that. And they only had a fire chief and, if I'm not mistaken, 2 paid employees. And the equipment they have, the wagon stuff, that was bought with fundraising money, not by the city. This is the Von Fuel and Gordon building, which was earlier Knapp's drugstore and was several drugstores over the years. And it's looking more like it does now. There were quite a number of churches in Lake Charles. The earliest religious services, there were none. When Mr. and Mrs. LeBleu and Mr. and Mrs. Sallier, the Ryans, whomever, had children, they registered the births in St. Landry, which was Opelousas, and then eventually Grand Coteau was even closer than Opelousas. So even though they lived over here, to have any kind of baptism or such, the priest would have to come here or they'd have to take the baby there. Same thing with marriages and such. This is the Episcopal Church, which was built in 1906. There were a number of people of Anglo heritage that moved. The Reed family were, and quite a few actually. It was a large church. This particular church was destroyed in the hurricane of 1918. It was located on the same property as the current church is. The First Presbyterian Church was within the neighborhood where the fire went through, so it was destroyed and another built in another place. Okay. I don't know, a while ago there was something on the corner that was blank, and I said it was corner of Ryan and Kirby, which it was, but it was a different time because this was on that corner. And they faced Ryan Street. The church, the convent, and the school all faced Ryan Street. Beautiful architecture. And they were responsible for bringing in not only the school, but the first hospital. The First Baptist Church, which was located next door to the library, was dedicated the day after the Great Fire. This church was replaced, I believe, in the 1960s, if I'm not mistaken, with the current building. The Jewish Temple, after the fire of 1910, they offered their building for the Protestants and the Catholics to worship in. The onion domes were destroyed in the hurricane of 1918 and were not replaced. It's another beautiful building that's on the National Register of Historic Places. This is the first Carnegie Library building. It was on part of this land that we're on now. And it was saved during the fire of 1910 only because the Majestic Hotel had their own water system and they sprayed it on all of the buildings around them. And I say only because, but that might not be true. The fire actually went southeast, so it may never have come here, but the hotel did help to protect it. The Howard House Hotel, the reason Lake Charles needed hotels, and they didn't have many for a long time, what Dr. Watson told me was that this was actually the first hotel, but they had boarding houses, and I guess you would call them inns. They were small places. But Lake Charles was the government center. They were also the center of bringing in and taking out goods. You know, the farmers here would probably ship out cotton. Eventually, they shipped out rice. The loggers shipped out lumber. So with people coming to Lake Charles to buy land, sell land, get married, register anything that needed to be registered in the courthouse, they needed to have a place to stay. No RVs. The home of Miguel Rostit was on the corner of Pujo and Bilbo, where the Majestic Hotel was built, and which is now a vacant lot. This home was moved to build the hotel, which that is it. Beautiful building. If I were independently wealthy, I would build one just like it in the same location.
Thank you.
Okay. Some people think that the Pleasure Pier and the Shell Beach Pier were the same thing, but they actually weren't. This was at the foot of Lake Street, and it was destroyed in the 1918 hurricane as well. After the fire of 1910, this was where people had to go to have entertainment, the dances, the plays, the recitals and such. And as I said, the Catholic Church built the first hospital, which was St. Patrick's, is St. Patrick's, in 1907 or 8. And this is a close-up of it. That's hidden within the current building they built around it. Because I can remember when it wasn't much bigger than that. Okay, so this is one of our downtown streets. That's Ryan Street looking north. On the right is the Calcasieu National Bank, which is on the corner of Ryan and Pujo. So it looks like a thriving little city, doesn't it? Looking south from Broad Street, on the right is the First National Bank, which now retains some of its former look. And as you will notice, the streetcars, they went both ways. Okay, the Great Fire of 1910, April 23rd, if I'm not mistaken, started to the left of the remaining building standing, and it was from a fire that was unattended. There were gale force winds blowing from the lake, and embers were flying, and they did not realize that the burning embers were falling on roofs nearby. So the brick courthouse, City Hall, St. Charles Academy, all caught fire only because their roof caught fire first. This was volunteers as well as the firemen, and there's men on this roof, if you can see them, trying to catch the embers before they catch fire. I can imagine that was choking smoke. No modern gear to protect them. And what was burning originally, where this smoke is so thick, the Williams Opera House was heart pine, and it was well oiled to make it look pretty. So that oiled pine made the thick smoke. Everything was tender. If it wasn't wood, it was paper or fabric. This is after the fire, the courthouse on the right, and the remnants of the brick St. Charles Academy on the left. And they're probably standing on the roof at the Pujo Street Cafe. And this is looking down Kirby Street. As I told you, you could look down the street and the courthouse was in the center. I don't know how they took this picture because it's supposed to be the corner of Ryan and Kirby. You can see that it was a major tragedy. Okay, going back in time, the postmasters were appointed by each administration, presidential administration. So sometimes they only had a 4-year term depending on which party was in office. In 1892, this was in the 200 block of Pujo Street. Pujo was a busy street. And Dennis Foster was the postmaster at that time. Maud Reed has the numbers. She writes who each of those men are. 1910, the new post office building was built on Broad Street, and it was the first time that the government actually had a building for the post office. Each postmaster had to find someplace or build someplace to serve as a post office. And that's now the Hunter Lundy law offices. The Masonic Lodge on Hodges Street is behind the post office building and next to the Jewish temple. Okay, we have cars on the streets now. And as I said, that's the Calcasieu National Bank on the right. If you'll notice the building with the balconies that are standing out from it, that was the Rig Maiden Hotel. That, until recently, was the Social Security Office building. So it's the only remaining building in that block of Ryan Street. That's the 800 block. On that side, that is. Looking south on Ryan from Broad, the store on the left, depending on the date, okay, it says Martin's store. That's where Kaufman's had been, Kaufman's store had been. In 1914, after the fire, St. Charles Academy built as far away from downtown as they could, I think.
Linda, going back to the last picture, is that where Walgreens was, or was Walgreens on the other side of the street?
Yes, Walgreens.
So was J.C.Penney's.
So was J.C.Penney's, right. It originated as Kaufman's
Okay.
and then became Martin's and Penny's and Walgreens. And now a vacant lot, still owned by the Kaufman heirs to my knowledge. Okay, so this is on the corner, like Dr. Watson said a while ago, of 7th Street, Ryan Street, and South Ryan Street, and at that time what was called South Street, which is what we call Ryan Street now, and South Ryan is now DeBakey Drive. Okay, and after the fire, they built a new city hall, and look at all the cars. Just in those few years, it went from horse and buggies to cars, automobiles. And on the left, you can see the new fire station, which is now renovated into one of the Catholic church offices. But that was where the new fire station was built. And I think the courthouse and the city hall wanted to be left alone too. They didn't want anything too close to them to burn. Okay, this is the courthouse after it was completed in 1911. And I want to show you, in 1915, how old would y'all say that the oak trees on the courthouse lawn are?
120?
They came up after 1910, even after 1915. So it's amazing. To me, those trees look well, they are over 100 years old now, but they've looked over 100 years old for quite a while. Now, I've reverted back in time. This is Lover's Retreat, and that is a walkway across the Piton Coulee, which, do all of you know where the Piton Coulee is? Clarence Street comes out onto Lakeshore Drive, and where the Civic Center was built on the land where the lake used to be, this at the far end would be near Clarence Street and near where you turn into the Civic Center Drive.
And the other end is Bank Street.
Right. And young people would take walks. I'm sure older people might too, but it was known as Lover's Retreat because it was something for them to go and be alone together. The Walnut Grove was where the port is currently located, and that was another favorite picnic spot. It was at the end of Shell Beach Drive where the port is now. The trees were cut down, and they are currently in a home as baseboards and framing and stuff like that. One of the homes there on Shell Beach Drive. And this is Shell Beach Drive going to the Walnut Grove. Looks a lot different, doesn't it? And it's changed again in 1905. They've got a dirt road, probably for their horses and buggies. The first bridge over the Calcasieu River, and that was near Walnut Grove, which comes up next. I think that's a beautiful photograph. 1923.
That was the drawbridge?
Yes, yes.
And when was it built?
I don't remember exactly. I think it was before 1920, though. And then there was a cross-country effort to make a coast-to-coast highway, which became the Old Spanish Trail, and Lake Charles was part of it. And this is 1929. What we know as Shell Beach Drive now was called the Old Spanish Trail. And I don't know where Elias Richards lived, but Maud Reed did. She knew exactly where that photograph was taken. Okay, and if you look at the bridge, you'll recognize the bridge, but that still looks different from today. There's the pumping station, I think it's called, there by Piton Coulee. It's something to do with the water. And the city docks are now located at the former Walnut Grove. And this is where I ended because, in a sense, this is where it began. The Salyers lived near Walnut Grove and near what is now the city docks when they located there in the early 1800s. So that is the beginning and the end. Thank y'all.